Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from, through, and from within human interactions, and having pursued and completed my master's in business administration and in clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about how shortcuts, when taken in life, at least on most days, when it happens consistently, can and does lead to a lot of mental, physical, and emotional stimulation, which is also called as overload stimulation or stimulation overload. Can and does lead to a lot of mental, physical, and emotional overload. Can and probably does lead, at least to some degree, to a lot of emotional, mental, and physical burnout, and can and does lead to chronic stress, which is also called as distress, stress that is almost perpetual, stress that is present on most days, not just in our lives, but in our heads, in our hearts, and in our bodies, our mind, body, and soul, which then naturally leads to the state of feeling anxious most days, feeling overwhelmed most days, perpetually leading us into a state of flight, fight, or freeze response, which are survival based responses, and thereby, to a large degree, dampening our ability to be a little more mindful, and thereby also dampens our ability to act in more conscious, in more wiser ways from our wiser self. So when I talked about shortcuts, in a way, any kind of a shortcut is helpful when we are operating only for our survival. For we need to conserve energy and we need to save ourselves. We need to protect ourselves, we need to guard ourselves, and thereby it is essential, it actually is quite imperative to only have shortcuts in life. However, when that is chronically done, when that is chronically repeated on most days of our lives, we train our mind, body, and our brains, our entire nervous system, to then live under the assumption that we are in a constant state of threat. We are in constant danger of something or the other, and that is why we need to take shortcuts. That is why we can't have anything that feels a little harder in life, a little tougher to take in life, anything that feels a little challenging in life. Because we are training our nervous system, we are training our mind and our body to kind of constantly be in the flight, fight, freeze response, i.e. the survival responses. And today when I'm talking about shortcuts, as that context in the backdrop, I'm essentially talking about the culture of reels that many of us are chronically consuming, that many of us are chronically feeding on to, that many of us are also chronically sharing. And let me just say here, let me just mention it for the context, that I'm not putting down or negating anybody who makes reels or who likes to watch reels. But there's a subtle difference, there's a subtle nuance with regards to watching and consuming and sharing reels, which is, are we doing that chronically, wherein it's almost become a compulsion and addiction, or are we doing it more mindfully? Are we trying to just watch the reels and then kind of go with the assumption that we know the entire content with regards to the context in which it was stated, in which it was shared? Or are we actually even consuming the entire narration of that conversation, of that contextual content through which the reel was formed, through which the reel was just taken out to be shared? Are we actually going to the real content, the contextual content, the entire conversation as well to gain more insight? Or are we just going with the assumptions that we have kind of gotten the entire contextual content, the entire narrative of the conversation through a 30-second or a 1-minute snapshot. Now here I'd definitely like to add that if you're chronically just looking at the reels, we are actually not just metaphorically, but we are actually taking shortcuts in life. It's almost like saying that I have watched these 50 reels, which are say 30 minutes or a minute long, and I've gotten the information, the bandwidth, the entire spectrum of the conversation that probably has lasted 50 hours, out of which that reel was removed and taken out. Now, metaphorically, if I were to draw any kind of a parallel here, it's almost like saying that I have watched 50 movies, or somebody else asking you to watch 50 movies or 500 movies in 30 seconds, in 30 seconds, in 30 seconds. It's almost like saying that, say somebody is giving you 10 different works, or you're choosing to do 10 different works, but every work needs to be done in 30 seconds, in 30 seconds, in 30 seconds. Imagine the kind of overwhelm that you would feel. Imagine the kind of overstimulation that your neuromuscular system would feel. Now just imagine if somebody were to tell you, or you were to make that choice for yourself, that you need to brush yourself in 30 seconds, that you need to wash your face in 30 seconds, that you need to have your bath in 30 seconds, that you need to have your coffee in 30 seconds, that you need to finish your breakfast in 30 seconds, that you need to get dressed up top to bottom in 30 seconds, that you need to pack your bags in 30 seconds, and that you need to rush for your school bus or towards your vehicle to go down to office or for any other chore in 30 seconds, that you were to prepare a meal in 30 seconds, that you were to finish your class or your work in 30 seconds, that you need to finish off any kind of a recreational activity that you've chosen for yourself in 30 seconds, and that you need to hit your bed and go off to sleep in 30 seconds. And if this happens on an almost everyday basis or most days of your life, imagine the kind of rush, imagine the kind of urgency and emergency that your nervous system would be living under, would be living with. And if that's the kind of overwhelm and rush your nervous system is getting attuned to, quite naturally, we ourselves are training our nervous system to be jumpy and to be chaotic and to be more stressed out. Quite naturally also, through another analogy, it's like saying that I've opened up 50 or 500 windows on my laptop or on my desktop or even on my phone, and the processor is constantly getting stimulated. I still expect it to function well, to function in a healthy manner, to function in the most optimal manner. Quite honestly and quite realistically, I need to check my own expectations with regards to that. For if so many windows have been opened, and if the machinery or if the laptop or the desktop is processing so much of an information simultaneously at the same time, quite naturally it is bound to feel overburdened. Quite naturally it is bound to feel overwhelmed. Quite naturally it'll hang up, or it'll slow down, or it may even crash. And that's exactly what happens to us with us. If we've just gotten used to seeing short reels or just gotten used to taking shortcuts in life almost all the times, or for majority of the times in our lives. Because firstly, we are reminding and rather constantly reminding our primitive nervous system that we need to find shortcuts, that there is some threat or a danger lurking around, and we need to constantly conserve our energy. We need to safeguard our energy. We need to take the shortest route so that we see the light of the next day, so that we don't get eaten or that we don't get killed by any creature that has the capacity to do so. Now let's remember that we evolved from the wild, from the jungles. Quite naturally, there's a part of our nervous system, rather a bigger part of our nervous system, our brain, that is designed solely for survival. And since it evolved from there, it has still stayed on with us. It still does its job very well of helping us survive. And yet, it's the same part of our nervous system that processes and keeps processing millions and billions of information per second without actually slowing down, without actually taking a breather. And yet, when we chronically just keep watching reels, or only stick on to watching reels, the conscious part of us that is doing so consistently and constantly trains our subconscious to do it more compulsively, to do it more addictively, which not only is overstimulating the entire system by having too much of information which it needs to constantly keep processing and making sense of, which invariably also leads to its burnout, which on the other hand, given that overstimulation and overload, which results in overprocessing, can also lead to us feeling more anxious. And just like the word I used, overprocessing, like any food that gets overprocessed, which eaten on most days is not healthy for us, similar is the consummation with reels as well. It's also quite possible that the same parts of our primitive nervous system, wired for our survival, may get activated in a very different way, wherein the way it evolved when there was scarcity of resources, and every berry and every nut and every root could, to some degree, be life-threatening had it not been tasted before. When such an abundance of things are presented before the same nervous system, it actually goes on a roller coaster high wherein it probably screams, "Woo! So many fruits, so many nuts, so many berries, I don't know what to choose from. I've never seen so much in life. And I'm so excited to see such an abundance of berries, cherries, roots, and nuts." And yet, at the same time, I'm also a little scared. But firstly, I've never seen so much of an abundance, so much of choice before me, and thereby I do not even know which is a safe one for me and will not cause me to die, or which is an unsafe one, though it looks pretty, though it looks good, though it looks tempting, though it looks colorful, and though it looks rich, but can also be deadly at the same time. And in my understanding, that primitive nervous system, in order to process the amount of choices it has before us and what it should actually choose that will help that person or the entire community survive, given the information with regards to the usage of the availability of those resources, was not in abundance, would once again, in my understanding, would also not just excite us, but probably, given the way that nervous system works, would also scare the shit out of us. Because the environment through which it evolved and still stays intact with us, which is in the jungles and through the jungles, only required it to make the safest bet possible, would only require it to make the safest choice possible for its very survival. And even though the information which metaphorically looks like the cherries, berries, nuts, and roots of the past would put extra load on the nervous system, making it feel overburdened, and thereby leading to its burnout and exhaustion as well. And in my understanding, shortcuts in life, when chronically taken up, when chronically adapted for most days in our lives, i.e. short reels with regards to the context of this particular video, has the same effect on that larger chunk of our primitive nervous system. Because after a while, it starts to happen in more mindless ways, in more compulsive ways, in more habitual ways than needed. Thirdly, since many a times it becomes compulsive and addictive, just like the overprocessed food, which provides the burst of dopamine, which momentarily feels good, does not resolve or solve the issue of satisfaction, the issue of fulfillment, the issue with contentment. And quite naturally, when we do not find that sense of fulfillment, contentment, and satisfaction, at least on most parts of the days, or at least on most days of our lives, we addictively and compulsively go back to that element that provided that burst of dopamine, that helped us feel pleasure, that helped us feel motivated for a small bit of time, which was through that addictive compulsion, which was through that dopamine hit and not out of intention. Quite naturally, after its effects starts to wear off, we begin to feel a little restless, we begin to feel unmotivated, and we begin to feel the sense of emptiness all over again, quite naturally creating a vicious cycle of going back to consuming the same thing all over again and repeating the pattern all over again. And let's again remind ourselves over here that our subconscious is wired, is designed through pattern recognition and repetition. And quite naturally, whatever gets repeated becomes a habit. And habits over a period of time quite naturally become mindless. Another aspect to taking shortcuts or watching reels with regards to this context is that it robs us of our ability to be a little patient. Patience does not necessarily translate into tolerance, but it also thrusts us, it pushes us towards seeking instant gratification. And anything that goes up instantly also generally has the tendency to come down instantly as well, which then again loops into the cycle of the compulsive addictive behavior. But it also challenges our ability, or rather dampens our ability, to handle frustration and agitation, probably leading towards anger issues or rage issues, which over a period of time when compounded can turn into a disorder. Taking shortcuts or watching reels through this context, in this context, also sets us up for having unrealistic expectations. And unrealistic expectations causes more misery than having expectations that are more firm, grounded, and realistic. And just to add another tangent and then rejoin it, or rather reconnect it, with the effects of taking shortcuts, or in this context, short reels in life, a few people had asked me beautifully with regards to more realistic things, their career choices, financial choices, and their relationships, wherein these people had asked me, well, if you're not getting the results that we want in say 15 days or 20 days or a month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, how do we know that it's time to quit investing there, that it's time to stop consuming and sharing that space, be it financial, be it professional, or be it in their personal spaces, in their relationship spaces? And well, for me, the answer was pretty simple: assessment. Now, simple does not necessarily mean easy. Simple just means simple. And for me, the simple analogy that I gave was that, say, supposedly, there's a couple who's wanting to conceive, and then after some trials and tribulations, they finally are able to conceive a child, a baby. Well, they quite naturally go for their regular checkups with regards to the growth of the baby. And the growth has certain parameters that are quite visible, that can also be felt within somebody's body. And during those checkups, if the parameters of the growth are felt and are seen, well, then one just needs to be patient enough for that baby to take birth. However, during the checkups, if one realizes that the growth of the baby or the fetus is not happening in the way it needs to happen, then quite naturally some sort of intervention will need to take place. Likewise, say with regards to your finances, if you've taken some advice and you've invested your money to grow in certain ways, and you've placed your eggs in different baskets, realistically checking in with your consultant that all of these eggs in different baskets will grow at different rates at different point in time. Well, we need to keep checking on that as well. And if the growth is happening the way it was predicted, at least to some degree, the way it was expected to grow, well, we can hold back our horses till they start showing different results, wherein once again, some intervention will need to take place, through which some decisions will then also need to be taken. Likewise, with any other thing in life, with any other decision in life, we need to keep checking in. We need to keep re-evaluating, to keep reassessing if we are meeting our own expectations or not. If our expectations also have some realistic grounded parameters or not, or are they completely unrealistic? And if we are consuming and rewiring ourselves or taking shortcuts in life on most parts of our life, on most days of our life. Because if we are doing that, if we are training ourselves for just taking shortcuts or just consuming short reels for more number of days in our life, we might unknowingly be training ourselves for a lot of other things that do not gel well with well-being, with wellness. And let's also reevaluate over here. And this note especially for people who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, who say that kids these days are just watching reels and have no patience left. That youngsters these days are looking for instant gratification almost all the time. Let's even cross-examine there if we are consuming the very same things that they are consuming. And invariably question, are we truly practicing what we preach? And yes, before I come to the conclusion of this particular video, I would once again like to state that I have nothing against reels, that I myself at times do watch reels, that at times it does provide some bursts of insights. But let's question if we are doing it mindfully or mindlessly, if you're choosing it deliberately and knowingly, or has that just become a compulsion and an addiction? And then to see if we found that particular reel that interesting, that has quite likely been taken out from a long formatted conversation. Have we taken out the time to actually listen to the entire conversation? Have we actually been curious and wondered if such a little snippet of that long conversation felt so good? Can I go to the long formatted conversation to listen to the entire conversation? Do I have the patience to listen to the entire conversation? Can I slow down a little bit to listen intently and engagingly with that long formatted conversation? Because if we've not done that for ourselves, we probably need to do that for ourselves first before we start giving advices, handing advices to others. So let's reflect on all of those aspects. Let's reflect on all of those parameters to be able to realistically ask ourselves, do we practice, rather personally practice most days, what we preach to others? Have we ourselves been taking shortcuts in life, or at least most days in life, preaching something else to others? Let's try and reflect on every bit of that, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.